Well, welcome everybody. My name is Oliver. I am a recovered alcoholic and an addict. Welcome to Life Beyond Addiction. This is a podcast created by yours truly and in conjunction with Oceanica, a treatment facility down in the coastal Pacific in Mexico. We have been in business for over 30 years and we have had the pleasure to witness north of 8,000 recoveries in our lifetime. We have created this podcast to create a safe environment for people that suffer from the disease of alcoholism and drug addiction and codependency as well. We welcome all addictions, and the purpose of this podcast is to create a safe space for you guys, so you can find a place in which you can relate your own story to what you're going to be hearing today. Today, I have the great pleasure to invite one of my greatest friends in the community in AA. His name is Jason. We've been working together for a while, and I believe that he's a great candidate to start this podcast. This is our first episode. I'm really excited. Jason, welcome. It's
Thank
great
you.
to have you here, brother, and thank you so much for giving me the pleasure to do this interview with you and just to have a chat like we always do, my friend, behind closed doors. So this is Jason, and I believe that it's important for people to understand what it is that we suffer from. Why is it that you and I found the solution in drugs and alcohol in the past, and how codependency has played a role in our lives? I believe that the public thinks that our problem is using, when in reality using drugs and alcohol has always been at least my solution. All the courage that I lacked when I was younger, all the power that I never had, all that power was granted to me by using drugs and alcohol. So drugs and alcohol, I believe that for people like us, it was never a problem. It was always our solution until that solution stopped working. So with that, I'm going to let you introduce yourself, to tell us who you are, where you're from, what you suffer from, and then we can move forward a little bit more into why it is that you and I used alcohol and drugs in the past, and we thought they were a solution. So please go ahead, Jace.
All right. All right. Well, thank you so much, Oliver. I'm honored to be here. I'm honored that you invited me for your inaugural podcast. I'm very excited for what you're doing with this new treatment facility. I happen to know you personally. And not only that, but I've gone through the step work with you as a sponsor and rely on you today for advice and support, and the experiences that you've been through. I can relate to my own, and it really helps to know that I'm not alone. Today I consider myself a recovered drug addict and alcoholic. uh, I've been a chronic relapser. I came into the program of Alcoholics Anonymous on June 12th, 2018. And today I have a little over 1 year and 6 months of sobriety. I think.
Congratulations, brother. Yeah.
Thank you, and Oliver played a very big part in that, and helping me to see some truth. I am a firm believer that the journey is everything, and I spent a lot of time in self-loathing and regret and remorse of the time I should have had, the things I should have done. But I understand today that I'm right where I'm at. I'm here in this meeting today because that's where God has placed me, and I accept that, and I accept 24 hours of sobriety that God has given me today. So I found a way today to remain sober, and that in itself is a miracle. Um,
Absolutely.
yeah,
Absolutely.
yep.
Jay, so why don't we start telling folks what is it that alcohol and drugs gave you, man? What did you think, or what did you thought back there and back then that drugs and alcohol could do for you?
So for me, I was about 11 years old. Um, Moved up here into eastern San Diego County from the city. I come from a broken home, and initially, as I look back, it was to fit in. I was trying to find a place. I never felt connected. I never felt loved, accepted, or good enough in my life. And I met a couple of people that were a few years older than me, and they were drinking alcohol and smoking pot, and I decided to join them. And at first I didn't like it, and I continued just to be a part of something. I wanted there was so much envy and emptiness inside of me that I wanted to really just be accepted. And what I found was after a few years, it began to take over. It began to minimize
Okay.
that emptiness that I was feeling inside. It began to minimize the fear that I was experiencing. And so I continued and I continued, and it became an every by 15 years old, smoking cigarettes, smoking pot every day, and drinking alcohol when I could get my hands on it, stealing money from my stepdad to buy alcohol on the weekends. And so it just kind of filled this void that I really had no knowledge of why it was there. Um, Wherever I
Okay.
was, I wasn't happy. I didn't want to be there, and alcohol and drugs gave me this ability to be comfortable with who I thought I was, and gave me this ability to become accepted amongst my peers and feel this at the time what I thought was real love, but what I see today was just a false sense of reality, and this delusion that led to excessive amounts of drugs and alcohol until it got out of control, and
Got you.
I
So,
couldn't stop.
so let me ask you a question. And for the people out there listening to us today, I mean, there's a lot of people that use, and they think that they use just to have fun or to relax or whatever it may be. And so it will be very good for viewers to see when you were using back then. I mean, forget about when you started. I mean, what it was that made you feel. In other words, drugs and alcohol were truly a solution for you, a solution for me. I mean, when we're doing it, we don't realize all these things. Right now, you and I can talk about all these things because we've been in recovery for a while. So today we
Right.
can say that it gave us power, that it gave us a sense of belonging, of love. But I mean, how powerful is it when you're in it? I mean, how blind are you to the real reason why you use? Can you go back and remember that? I mean, how powerful drugs and alcohol were for you? In other words, how difficult it was to live without them.
I I was living. I began to live in this place where I believed that I was in control. I believed that I was making a choice to alter my state of being every single day from the moment I woke up until the moment I went to bed. And all the while, never recognizing that it was a problem. I felt entitled. I felt as if I deserved to do whatever I wanted, whenever I wanted. And drugs and alcohol were proof of that to everybody around me, to my parents, to my peers, to my teachers, to my coworkers, to my employers eventually. And I utilized it to stay away from the uncomfortableness of myself.
Okay.
And I kind of recognized that as it progressed, that and the way that I recognized that was moments of sobriety, say waking up in the morning and not getting high until about 11 or 12 o'clock, or having a drink until 10 a.m., recognizing the state of being and how I felt sober. And so drugs and alcohol fix that every time. It was
Okay.
almost as if I put this mask on, and I was able to bury all of the feelings, all of the emptiness, and it worked for a very long time.
That
And
is correct. Yeah.
I relied upon it. I built a life behind it. I became a drug dealer, and I just it just became my everything. Everything.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think that's really important for viewers to see and for listeners to listen, that, for us, I mean, at least for me, alcohol and drugs truly made me whole. I mean, when I was high, I never realized that I was using it as medicine per se, or as an avenue for me to be able to survive this world. I don't know if you feel the same as I do, but in the community of alcoholism and drug addiction and codependency, we have a sense of being victims of the world. We believe, or a lot of us believe, that the world owes us something. So we are constantly seeking for our own good. I mean, there's this emptiness, this void that we have inside of us, that no matter what we pull into that void, the void never gets filled. So hence we become very selfish, and it's a daily struggle to get what it's owed to us. So taking responsibility of our lives, or at least for my life back then, it was very difficult because I always blamed something, someone, or an event that happened in my life for the condition that I was living, or the feeling of emptiness that I was experiencing. So today I know, after being recovered, and after being in the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous for a while with you, that we suffer from this disease that tells us every day that we're not good enough, that we're inadequate. We have this disease that tells us that we need something in order for us to be or become whole. So I guess that's what I'm listening you saying. So tell me a little bit about the consequences of your abusing of drugs and alcohol after you see, because the medicine stops working at some point, right? This which
Yes.
has saved our lives, or this which saved my life for many years. I thank God for the existence of drugs and alcohol. That's maybe sounds absurd to a lot of people, but for a long time, that was the only thing that I could do in order for me to be able to live among all of you. I mean, drug addiction
Yeah.
and alcoholism, it's just more than using. It's all that gives us, as addicts, as alcoholics, to be able to survive in this world. Until that tool becomes a weapon and it starts killing you little by little. So are there any consequences that you're willing to share with us of where that medicine, that fix, that heaven, that nirvana that was produced by drugs and alcohol actually ended up in your life, in your story?
Yeah, absolutely. The consequences have it today. It's easy to reflect, and I feel that unless one goes through a process of recovery, it's near impossible to truly reflect on the consequences. The circumstances in my life weren't the ones that are common with DUIs and handcuffs and incarceration and institutions. Mine was more of a private hell. And what I did was I turned my back on my family. I left my home at 18. I moved out of my house the day before Mother's Day at 18 years old, moved in with my girlfriend in an apartment down the road that my grandmother co-signed for. Complete inconsideration of my mom and my younger brothers that were there. Turned my back on them. And as we talk further today, I can see some truth in why I did that. But the consequences began to build as I was selling drugs and womanizing and moving through life with a complete disregard of other people and their feelings, and carrying around this attitude of superiority. These drugs and alcohol built my ego and my pride up so high that it now, in retrospect, I can see that it created a level of isolation from a true connection with anybody ever. And I started a family very young, 19 years old. My wife today of 30 years, we got together. She had a 3-year-old son. I ended up adopting him, and we had another son. And I just ruled that house with an iron fist. I'm not a physical guy. I'm more of an emotionally abusive, distant, unable to express real love, and therefore I was unable to accept it, although I spent all this time searching for it. And so what happened was I built this family without the proper guidance, without the proper wisdom, without love. And I created this attitude of, like you mentioned, being such a victim in life. I'm the provider. I'm going to do what I want to do, which is selling drugs in front of all of you, drinking everywhere we go. Everyone you know, everybody you see is drinking and using, but you're not allowed to. You're not allowed to do it. My children are 34 and 30 today, and so raising them was this attitude of do as I say, not as I do. They spent their entire lives trying to be like me, which today we're able to have conversations about how I've instilled these principles in them that have nearly destroyed their lives. And I was only able to see that behind this process that we go through in Alcoholics Anonymous. I'm such a womanizer. I've looked to women my whole life to validate my existence. Attention from women, it gives me the courage to be who I think I need to be. It makes me get to this place of validating the superiority and knowing that I am worth something. I was unfaithful to my wife multiple times. I ended up having a long-term affair while my children were 16 and 19. And the woman wasn't very much older than my oldest son.
Wow.
I basically lit a bomb off in my living room and walked out and left my family to clean it up. And this disease just forced me to be indecisive, think that the grass is greener on the other side. This other person is validating who I am. As soon as I had it, I was miserable. All I wanted was to go back. And so I continued for a period of 6 months to come back and forth to my family and lie to them. I said things to my children and my wife that I came home on my knees, having a nervous breakdown, begging for them to accept me back into the home. And I said, I promise you, I will never leave this home again unless I leave in a box. And within 2 days, I left again, and I was with the other woman. And, thank God for this process and the grace of God in my life that I'm even still married today and that I have a real relationship with my children is a real testament to what this program can do. So I guess my point is, like, it took me a long time to see that the consequences of my addiction and my alcoholism may not have been apparent to everybody else, but they became so apparent to me. And as I began to look inward and deeper, I got to see that they were actually more damaging than going to jail or getting a DUI or being institutionalized. Yes. There was this life of living like the Walking Dead, and I don't know how to connect, and I don't know how to love, and you're lucky to have me in your life, and just shut up and do what I say, and don't you see that I'm back at home? And these are the kinds of things that ultimately walked me into the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, because it just got so bad. And we tried to repair it for so long. We spent 6 years after this last affair, my wife and I, going to counseling, separating from time to time, drinking very heavily, using, and we just could not come to terms with any sort of solution. Everything was superficial. There'd be moments of bliss followed by worse pain. And ultimately, I walked into the doors of Alcoholics Anonymous. I began this journey of recovery and honesty. And I'm so grateful to meet a person like you that was able to sit down with me and even dig a little bit deeper, because I went through the steps a few times the normal way. Well, I wouldn't say the normal. There's so many different ways that people go through the steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. But this process of the Big Book Awakening, given that there's thousands and thousands of people across the world that are doing the step work the exact same way,
Of
I
course.
feel it's very powerful, and it really was
Indeed.
enlightening to me. So
Now, all this that you tell me right now, thank you so much. I mean, your openness, your honesty, I think is going to help a bunch of people, man. But while you were doing all of this, man, you're an incredibly successful business owner, man. You're a self-made man. I mean, from the outside, anybody that of your friends or anybody that met you before, they would say that you have the life, you have the cars, you have the house, you have the business, you have the employees. So you were a very successful, functioning alcoholic and drug addict. I mentioned that because I think that people mistaken being successful out there and being a provider at home, right? And they think that by providing to their families, by being successful in the world materially, um, their behavior is justified. So what impresses me about your story is that even though you were doing all this and you were going through all this pain and all this suffering, all this blindness, you were able to achieve a very successful career. Today you own a business, right?
yes, yeah, I've been a painting contractor for 27 years now, and you're absolutely right when it comes to that aspect of my life, and it was part of that's why it was so helpful to look through that and deeper, because I spent so much time initially in recovery looking at the level of success that I had achieved. And once the fear of being sober is overcome, it's hard to see what the real exact nature of all these wrongs are and the real fears are when I'm surrounded by financial success and praise from my peers and employees that look up to me and rely upon me to provide a job for them. Um, so I almost had to just step back and minimize all of that and look through it in order to really accept the first step, to really accept the level of powerlessness and unmanageability in my life, because it's very easy to step back and say my life isn't unmanageable. Even though
Correct.
all the things I just shared with you were horrible, I'm still managing and I'm still providing. And so looking through that was difficult, very difficult in the beginning. Today it's a complete different, you call it a paradigm shift, and I love that. And that is what has happened in my life. Is it's a different perception. It's people aren't, I'm not, these people aren't serving me anymore. I'm serving them. And so I get to see that, and I get to see the blessing. I've been put in that place today to even to be able to sit here at noon on a Thursday and have this conversation with you, to be able to run a workshop, to be able to engage with other alcoholics and addicts, to be able to help people financially.
Right.
And none of it is from me, is what I've made choices. I have to work. I have to make decisions. But today I ask for guidance for each and everything I do. And I'm very grateful for where I'm at.
Right.
So yes, looking through that was very difficult. And I admire people that can do that, because my experience is that can be very difficult
Oh,
at times.
absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah,
And you know something, you're one of the lucky ones, man, because you got here with everything, with your
right.
business intact, you all the material wealth that you built, you kept. And I am
Right.
so happy for you. And in my case, in my personal case, man, I had to destroy everything before I understood the ego of an alcoholic, and more a successful alcoholic or a successful drug addict is so hard to pierce, to break. You know
Yes.
something, when when you believe that in life you are all this, you have all this power and you have created all this wealth and all this success, and you look at your family and your family have everything that they desire, that they need, they live in excess. You know what I'm saying? So for
Yes.
me, I mean, I wasn't one of those lucky ones, man. I lost everything, man. I had to declare bankruptcy because I owed a lot of money. I was a very successful financial advisor. I everything that the world or everything that people told me that I needed to do in order for me to be okay, to be happy, I did that. They tell
Right.
me, Oliver, you have a great job, if you have a great title, if you don't surrender, if you make all this money, if you travel the world, if you get married, if you get children, you have children. I mean, if you're a good member of society, you finally going to achieve happiness. And unfortunately for me, when I had all that, I still had this emptiness that I have carried all my life. That today you and I know it as a spiritual malady, right, or
Yes.
an existential void. There's something inside of us that we don't know what it is exactly, but I wasn't ever comfortable with myself. It doesn't matter how many titles I had. It doesn't matter how much money I had in the bank. It didn't matter how many times I traveled during the year. This emptiness inside kept on just. It was like a cloud that never went away. So
Yes.
I guess that this is important to mention today in this first podcast because I mean, there's many of us that are lucky enough, like you, to keep everything that they built their whole lives. The sad reality is that if we don't learn, if we don't look at ourselves with honesty, if we don't treat this as a disease that needs treatment, needs others, needs help, needs the help of God, man, for us to recover, we can
Yep.
lose everything,
Yep.
right? In my case, I lost everything. I have never been in jail. I've been in a few treatment facilities, thank God. But it's so important to touch a little bit about the ego of the alcoholic. I mean, that ego that we built during all these years, listening to a fantasy that we created in order for us to survive. That's
Yes.
so difficult to break, man.
It
It's so
is.
difficult to break, and more when your life is functioning. So I'm
Yeah.
so happy that you are the first one in this show because you're a successful man. You have achieved what people perceive as success in the world. But
Yes.
even with all that success, you're still here, like you said, in a Thursday afternoon, sharing about your experience with all of
Right.
us, right? To create a
Yes.
safe space for people. So I love your story, man. I love you. I mean, we have a great relationship, and I would love you to now speak a little bit about the recovery side. What is it that you have found in the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous? What it is that you have found in the service? How it is that you were able to find that higher power that today I know guides your life and bless us every day with sobriety and bless us every day with love and understanding and compassion and empathy. Because I mean, for everybody out there, the little dirty secret of AA is that AA is a wonderful gift to reach God. There are 12 steps to heaven, 12 steps to grace.
Yes.
You see, I have tried everything under my power to fix my problem. I have tried all my life to be happy. I have tried all my life to live at peace. I have tried all my life to be able to manage my life, to gain that power back, right? To be a
Yeah.
normal member of society. I had to try everything before I surrender my will to a
Right.
process, to the meetings of AA, to a sponsor, to a treatment facility, to God, right? So, how was that shift for you? I mean, what was it that broke you, and you finally got that willingness that it's needed in order for you to surrender? I mean, to do that first step, right?
Yeah.
To
Yeah.
truly admit that your life wasn't manageable, that we were born unmanageable, that the only power that we knew was alcohol and drugs. I mean, what
Yes.
was the breaking point in your life, and how did your life change since then?
Yeah. So I want to touch on too also, I mean, I have been in business a very long time. I My business gained and my life 100 times success since I walked through the doors of Alcoholics Anonymous. I remember sitting on a tailgate with my one employee, telling him in 2018, before I came into Alcoholics Anonymous, I didn't know how I was going to pay him that week. I borrowed $30,000 from a bank twice in that 1 year in order to sustain the business. I had borrowed so much money on my home and refinanced so many times. We filed for bankruptcy. We almost lost our home. I was selling drugs in order to sustain the business, the bills at home. So there was this delusion that I was successful. Yes, I was a business owner. Yes, I was paying my bills, but barely. And what I've recognized is since I have surrendered to this process, to the power of God in my life, and to see my own truth, my life has taken off exponentially. And so there was a foundation there to build on, which I wouldn't say I had lost everything, but the truth is I really had nothing. And I'll never forget on June 11th, the day that I was full of pills, alcohol, and weed, and screaming at my oldest son who had been lost in Mexico for a week and blaming him for every problem we had ever had.
Hmm.
Um, Even the affair, I blamed every single thing on him, and something snapped, and I heard myself. It was like an out of body experience where I saw how I was treating my family. My wife was in tears on the porch. She couldn't believe what was coming out of my mouth. And I went down below on the property. I sat on the wood pile. I was sitting there with the 6-pack of beer. I had 2 left. I was crying, and I just asked God for help. I'm done. I'm done. And so I went to my first meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous the very next day. And what you mentioned, the ego and destroying the ego. And as I proceeded to get sober and go through the steps, I think I made it 14 days without smoking pot. Granted, I went 3.5 years without drinking, but I continued to smoke pot, and I continued to lie. And I finally came clean to people in the program. I reset my sobriety date, and I did that over and over and over, probably 4 or 5 times. Somebody finally told me about Big Book Awakening. And a good friend of mine said, Jason, if you don't call these people, you're going to die. And I went on a meeting online. I listened to a guy named Vinny speak. And I also saw you, Oliver, speak. I'll never forget on step 6 and 7. I was blown away. I could not believe what I was hearing because I was familiar with the program and the book. I'm an intellectual guy, and I spent 5 years with self-knowledge, and it didn't fix me. It was me removed of the power of God and the knowledge of the program. I could not stay sober. So coming into this process, I began to surrender to you guys at first and the way you were doing the work.
I love it.
I began to learn some things about myself. And I went through the steps in the Big Book Awakening with Vinny. And I went to the Super Bowl in 2022. My business was taking off. We had all kinds of money. So I bought tickets to the Super Bowl. I hadn't had a drink in over 3 years, but I was only about a year without anything. And I went to get my wife a vodka cranberry, and I ordered 2. And I looked at her and I said, this is between me and you. And she looked at me and said, do not involve me in your bullshit. Wow. And I just began to drink again. And I came back home and I started using again. And I did that for about 5 months. I was miserable. I went back to Vinny. I went through the steps again. And I got about 1 year and 8 months. And then I did it again. I had a whole workshop lined up full of women. You were involved in this. And I remember asking you to help me. And I remember the day I called you and said, I'm just not willing to commit to this. And
I remember that. I remember that day that I told you, listen, Jason, go home and ask yourself if you're ready to commit, because the change in the paradigm shift that you were talking about needs all your willingness. It needs all your heart, man. You can't have measure this into existence.
That's right.
So, and then it's amazing how the will gets strong again. And I think that's important for people to understand. I mean, even though you just shared everything, all the things that you have done, you had all this time. You went to meetings. You were talking to me. You were talking to Vinny. You were talking to great personalities in AA. And you thought for some absurd reason that you could drink again, man.
Yes.
And that's so common in AA, man. I mean, sometimes relapse is part of recovery. It doesn't have to be, but sometimes it is. Yeah, that's how powerful our mental obsession is, I guess.
That's right. And even more important is, I will never forget when you told me, if I don't find the face of this spiritual malady, I'm going to do it again. And I was so baffled, and I had no idea. And thank God for the time you spent with me and the way we went through this work, and understanding that there was these underlying fears in my life that had been driving everything. And what I began to see was that, coming from this broken home in this family that I wasn't never good enough for, that I turned my back on, and I was going to prove to the world and prove to them that I was better than everybody. I was going to play the father role to both of my parents, the father role to my brother. I was going to dominate my family. I was going to be better than all my friends. And this fear of not being good enough, and ultimately this fear of failure drove me to have this principle in my life that told me that a real man does not ask for help from anybody
Oh, I
ever,
remember that.
ever. And and
Yeah.
and what that was for me is weakness. And
Yes.
so as I began to recognize it, that my spiritual malady is driven by this idea that surrender and asking you guys to truly help me was weakness, and it's driven by this fear of failure in my life. I took that attitude into my family and I was never able to connect. I took that attitude into the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous and I was never able to remain sober because I would get to this place of delusional thinking that you guys are weak. I don't need your help. I'm going
There
to
you
prove
go.
to you that I'm stronger
Yes.
than you. And I would
Yeah.
walk out and do it all over again.
Right.
And,
And
and
let me pause you for a little bit, and that's, I guess, that's the main problem of us, of alcoholics and drug addicts. We
yes,
suffer from a condition. This is very important for me to stress. Drugs and alcohol are only the manifestation of a disease. When you get an alcoholic or a drug addict to stop using, he remains with himself. He remains with his disease, with his sickness. And that disease and that sickness is a void, the spiritual malady that Jason is referring to. It's this feeling of not being good enough, of being inadequate, of not being worthy of being loved, of having to prove to the world that we're enough. I mean, we try to prove to ourselves and to the world that we're enough, doing all types of foolish things. But the drive is so intense because that's the only truth that we know. And that's why we were built different. We're not built different just because we can't start drinking and stop all of a sudden. That's just part of our disease. Our disease, we have a mentality that tells us that next time is going to be different. We have destroyed our lives. Our homes could be up in flames. And we think that the next time we're going to be able to control that drinking. But we're so anxious to drink and to drug again because deep inside of us, we have this emptiness that we were born with. You see, I mean, today I know that I was an alcoholic way before I took that first drink, way before I took that first drunk, because I never belonged. I always felt different. I always felt oversensitive. Life, it was very difficult for me to understand. And that's what the spiritual malady is. That's what alcohol and drugs treat. You see, it would be amazing to tell everybody right now that they just stop abusing whatever substance they're consuming. They're going to be fine. They're going to feel amazing. There's a saying in the rooms of AA that's called the pink cloud, and that means that, of course, when you stop using drugs and alcohol, you start feeling good, man. You start feeling whole. But in reality, what we treat with the 12 steps is that malady, is that uncomfortableness that we feel and we have felt all our lives. And that condition is with us sober or drunk. It has nothing to do with the substance. So what Jason is talking about, so important to realize that in reality, Jason was doing all those drugs and all those and all that alcohol and all those pills and whatever he was doing to quiet that malady, right? He needed to express to the world that he didn't need help so he can tell to himself that he was enough, that he was a man. But I think that you and I, we share the same. And every alcoholic and addict that I have met, we share the same traits. We need to prove to the world our sufficiency. We need to prove to the world that we matter, that we can, that we're man, that we're courage. It's so hard for us to live in vulnerability. So I mean, it's a disease that it's way larger than just the drugs and the alcohol, man. And you stay with that when you sober up. That's why the need to work the 12 steps. That's why you need professional help. Sometimes you need psychologists, sometimes you need psychiatrists, sometimes you need treatment facilities. But you need to build this group of people that can help you support your recovery, because just quitting drinking, you won't cut it,
not enough.
right? Because
Right.
the ego keeps on rebuilding, man. So that paradigm shift that you talked about, the
Yeah.
shift has to occur in our thinking, in our perception, in the way that we feel, the way that we see life. And we have tried every avenue to do that. That's
Yeah.
why the need of a higher power. That's why the need of God. So if you
Yes.
want to go in that route and that avenue and see how it is that you have found the solution in the 12 steps. Also, a Big Book Awakening, the only thing that Big Book Awakening is, it's a process of working the steps of AA. It's not a different style. It's just what we do is that we turn every statement in the book into a question. So that will force the person doing the work to have an experience with the book. You see, just knowing self-knowledge is not enough for us, Jason. I don't know if you agree with us.
I do,
With me,
yeah.
but what we need is an experience with the work to compare ourselves to Bill, to Bob, to all the stories behind the book, and to really ask the questions: is selfishness my problem? You know, everything that the Big Book Awakening does. So for all of you guys, Big Book Awakening, the only thing that it is that everything that it's inside of the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous, written in 1935, I believe,
39, yep.
39 it was
Yep.
published. We just turn all the statements into questions, so that forces us to have an experience with the book. So if you want just to expand on that, Jason, I mean, how it is that you finally found surrender, that you finally found a power greater than yourself, that you finally gave up the thinking that you were enough, that you were spirit to me and to everybody in the rooms.
Yeah, this last time, June 5th of 2024 is my sobriety date. And I spent from January of 24 until June 5th out there using and drinking again. In that time, my father was a 50-year drug addict and alcoholic. And my father got pneumonia and they intubated him. And I had to go to the hospital and make the decision for them to pull the tube and put him in hospice. And there were so many unspoken resentments and amends that never were completed properly. And I was never fully free. And what happened was that particular circumstance in my life broke me. It cracked me open. I finally saw what I heard in the rooms of people saying it worked until it didn't work. And in my mind, it always worked. And what I found myself sitting on my porch, half drunk, pills in me, high, and the pain would not go away. And I looked at my wife and I said, if I don't go back to Alcoholics Anonymous, I'm going to go inside and put that gun in my mouth. And she looked at me and said, okay, well, let's start with the pills. Let's flush them down the toilet. And then I called Oliver and I went and met him and I cried and we talked about this and we began this journey through the steps again. And what I found is there's an initial fear of living life sober. And it happens within the first 3 to 6 months of sobriety, depending on when you're clear enough to actually get into the work. And what I found is once that fear is overcome, then the real fear sets in. And what happens is I begin to recognize through admission of powerlessness that God is the answer. Reliance upon him is the solution. Spending my whole life relying on self is not working anymore. And self-reliance has completely failed me. I have to ask myself, how am I going to deal with this fear today? And what I do is my ego and my pride grow. And I look to outside circumstances to satisfy, mostly women, to satisfy my ego and my pride, to overcome these fears of not being good enough and failure and being alone. And I look to them for validation of my existence and recognizing that aspect of me and who I really am. What I find out when I go through this work is what I'm not. Everything I thought that I am, I get to see that that's not me. That is what I'm creating as a protection mechanism to hide this. You mentioned vulnerability, and it is the scariest thing for me to do in life. And the best part about the steps for me today is finding a way to be comfortable in my own skin, sober, and to be able to live. It's not so much about not drinking or using. Of course, that is underlying everything. And if I'm not careful, that is my solution. But I understand today that I don't obsess over it. I go through days and days. I don't think about it. My wife still drinks every day. She smokes pot at night, and I'm in a place of neutrality. I'm safe and protected, but it's contingent on this maintenance that I do and this understanding that my ego and my pride. I was talking to you earlier about walking this line in my life. And what the steps have done for me is this ability to recognize a constant necessity of God reliance in my life. I walk this line of ego and pride and fear every day. And I've lost the power of choice over drugs and alcohol. And I've recognized that through this step work. But the choice that I have today is reliance upon God. And the changes that have occurred behind the steps in my life, the inventory process, the way that we do it in the Big Book Awakening is phenomenal. And the truth that I'm able to see about myself, again, about who I'm not, who I think I was. And the part of that paradigm shift is for me to look at myself in a whole new light. One of the things you told me was, and I'll never forget it, was to be gentle with myself and to bring it back to the present. And when I'm going nuts, pick up the phone. And those are kind of apropos of my life today. Those are things that guide and direct me, along with this level of God reliance. For instance, our 11th step talks about when we wake up in the morning, we're going to God. I still wake up today. My mind is racing. When I go to bed, I still have sleepless nights. It's better, but I run a business. I have a lot of responsibility. What I can do today is go to God with questions. Please give me guidance. Please give me inspiration. Yes, I have to plan my day. Yes, I have to make decisions, but they're not made by me. They're made through inspiration and turning to this power in my life. That is something that I never did. I've always believed in God. I was raised Christian, but I've never relied upon it. And today, even my life's not perfect. My marriage is not perfect. My ego and pride get in the way. I have to recognize that I'm going to make mistakes. Amends are going to have to be made. What am I going to do to better myself? And most important, to learn to interact. What I found is the most important aspect of life today is relationships. And I've spent my whole life fueling relationships with drugs and alcohol. So they had no substance. And when I'm sober and I'm working the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous, all of a sudden relationships build substance. But what's scary is that involves vulnerability. That involves emotional stability and communication, which I am not used to doing. And so these are the aspects of the steps of my life. And that's what I like about the Big Book Awakening Fellowship that I've become a part of, is that we talk a lot about living life today sober and how the bedevilments in the book can come up sober. I can be a prey to misery and depression. I can be full of fear. I can have trouble with personal relationships. But today I have these solutions to that through the steps of Alcoholics Anonymous to help me. And walking towards the 12th step to actually be of service to other people has completely changed my life. And I'm currently running a workshop. I've never done that. You recommended for me to start something like that. I've embarked on this journey. But honestly, you gave me the advice of don't let your ego get in the way. And what happened? I've been recognizing my ego and my pride growing behind helping other people. So I have to be very careful and I have to be very honest with myself. And again, am I looking to people for validation of my own existence, or am I truly trying to be of service and be helpful and carry a message to somebody? And the biggest message I can carry to people is that for me, this is the hardest thing I've ever done. And reliance upon God and acceptance of who I really am, and understanding that scared little boy inside of me that I'm trying to find this level of compassion for, that I've never had, is very difficult. But I
Yes.
think the awareness of all of that has given me the ability to embark on this journey of changing what I have created through 30 years of drinking and using and abusing people and being dominant and superior and better than you. And all of that doesn't just change with the snap of a finger or 12 steps. This is a lifelong journey. And
Yes, sir. Yes,
it's
sir.
important for me to recognize those things. So that's kind of what the 12 steps have done for me, is just giving me this ability to actually become useful. I spent my whole life thinking I was useful to everybody. But today I can see, if I'm useful to somebody, I'm actually helping to see my own truth, which means I'm being vulnerable and honest, and I'm building this level of compassion for myself while I'm helping somebody. And that makes it truly altruistic. Otherwise, my ego and my pride are involved, and the old Jason comes back, and now I'm just this arrogant, sober, recovered guy who's going to tell you what you need to do to
Of course.
heal. And that doesn't work,
That's right.
so it's a struggle,
Man,
but
man, I
I'm
love
happy.
it, man, and I love it that you bring so much reality, man, because a lot of people think that sobriety it's easy. I want to
Yeah,
make 2 points. The first point is that here in AA, of course, we're going to be talking about God, because that's spiritual collection that we need in order for us to get sober, to live a great life. It's also
yes,
important to mention that we don't have any monopoly on God. This is not something. Jason mentioned that he's a Christian. I am a Christian as well, but that's not a requirement. So the God that we talked about here in AA, it's a God that works, that wants to get involved in your life, that's going to help you make that paradigm shift that we have tried so hard all our lives to do it, and we have found ourselves without power to do the change necessary in order for us to survive. However, however beautiful the program is, we're human beings, right? We're going to have good days. We're going to have
yep,
bad days. We have an ego that is going to reconstruct by itself if we don't pay attention to it. I heard a lot of humility in your part right now, and that right there is the paradigm shift, man, that we're talking about. That loving approach that you have to life today, the truly altruistic way that we work, that we help people. It's amazing. So, Jason, thank you so much for your time, brother. I always enjoy spending time with you. In my book, you're a success story. I always send people your way because I know you have a message of depth and weight that you can carry to people. I commend you for doing this podcast. I love you for it. You're my first guest, and I couldn't think of a better person than you to bring on. Thank you so much for your honesty, for your openness. We are here. This is a space that Jason and I and all the guests that I'm going to have in the future are trying to give you the best of ourselves, and that's our experience. That's our suffering. That's our hope. That's our story. And today, by doing that, I mean, the only thing that I want this podcast to give you is the hope that there's recovery, that there's life beyond addiction, that the chains of addiction are real, right? But on the other side of addiction, it's a beautiful life. It's a fulfilling life. It's a life of success, of peace, of humility, of happiness, of wholeness, of purpose. So, Jason, thank you so much. And before we close, I know you're an author and you're about to publish a book. Would you like
I
to tell us
am.
a little bit about that, man? I would love to hear that.
Sure, I'd be honored. I mean, I don't really call myself an author, but I did write a book, and I guess that will make me a published author. The short version is, I've spent years studying the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous, and I've spent years doing a daily devotional out of a book called Jesus Always. And it's a page a day, and it gives me scriptures to read. And what happened was, I started to see a connection with the short scriptures and portions of the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous, and I began to write them down. And I went to meditation and prayer about it, and I was directed or guided. It's not like I hear some voice in my head, but I was kind of guided to try and come up with 100 of them. And I did. And then I started to write short paragraphs under each one pertaining to the step work and the portion of the big book, and how it is very similar to the scripture. I put a consideration at the bottom for the reader to look at. The book is called But for the Grace of God, a bridge between the big book and the Bible. I would say by the end of January 2026 that book will be available on Amazon and Barnes and Noble. I'm going to create a website called butforthegraceofgod.com. I'll put my workshop recordings and some links to the BBA works, and a link to Amazon to check out the book. I'm also going to have a Facebook page on it. I'm just going to let God, here was my intention. It's not to sway anybody religiously. If one person in recovery who is struggling with a connection with the power of God in their life can see a connection in my writings and look further on their own, then I've achieved my purpose. Or if one person who's religious but has bias against the program of Alcoholics Anonymous but can't stay sober, sees that program of Alcoholics Anonymous came from the same principles out of the Bible, then I've accomplished my goal. So Absolutely. Basically to change one person's life is all that I'm looking for. And I'm very vulnerable in the book. It's very elementary. It's an easy read. And I'm hoping that we have some good success with it, that we can just reach people that are struggling with the connection and the power of God in their life, and know that it's open to them and the way that they understand it and what does it really mean to you. So yeah, it's called But for the Grace of God, a bridge between the big book and the Bible. And you look for it, sometime in late January, February, it should be on the market. So
thank you, Jason. Thank you, brother. Thank you so much for the service that you do, for everything that you do for us, for me, particularly. Thank you to you, the viewers, the listeners. This is our first episode. If you like the episode, like and subscribe. You're going to find way more interviews like this in the future. Again, we're trying to create a safe space for you to try to relate to what it is that we're living. There's always a solution. This is sponsored and brought to you by Oceanica Treatment Facility down in the Pacific in Mexico, in Mazatlan. All the information is going to be down in the description. If you need help, we have a hotline 24 hours a day. We will be more than willing to help you and your loved ones achieve sobriety. So, Jason, with any further ado, thank you so much for your time, brother.
Thank you.
I love you, and we'll see you soon.
Awesome. Thanks a lot, man.
Right on. My pleasure.